Today we explore a deeper question. What truly happens spiritually when a narcissist loses an empath? At first glance, it may appear to be just another breakup. Two people separate. Life moves on. But beneath the surface, something far more significant occurs. Relationships are energetic exchanges. When one person consistently gives empathy, patience, and emotional regulation, while the other consumes validation and control, an imbalance forms, and spiritually, imbalance always seeks correction. When the empath walks away, the first shift is exposure. The emotional support system that once softened insecurity is gone. The reassurance that stabilized fragile confidence disappears. Without that steady supply of affirmation, unresolved self-doubt rises to the surface. What once looked like strength may begin to reveal dependency. This is not mystical punishment. It is psychological consequence. The second shift is accountability. Empaths often delay consequences because they forgive quickly and absorb emotional turbulence. Their presence acts as a buffer against reality. When they leave, that buffer dissolves. Patterns that once went unchecked now produce direct results. Distance, mistrust, isolation. Spiritual law is simple. Energy returns to its source. The third shift is introspection. Without someone to project blame onto, there is silence, and silence invites awareness. In that space, a person must confront who they are without admiration or distraction. Growth becomes possible, but only if ego gives way to honesty. And finally, there is transformation, especially for the empath. Walking away is not weakness. It is alignment with self-worth. It is the decision to stop rescuing and start respecting oneself. Spiritually, this is empowerment. When you reclaim your energy, you reclaim your peace. The deepest truth is this: when emotional light withdraws, illusion fades. What remains is reality. And reality always offers a choice: repeat the pattern or rise above it. When an empath walks away from a narcissistic dynamic, the spiritual shift that occurs is not dramatic on the surface, but profound beneath it. For a long time, the relationship may have functioned through an invisible imbalance where one person consistently supplied patience, validation, emotional regulation, and reassurance, while the other unconsciously depended on that supply to maintain stability. The empath's presence often acts as an energetic stabilizer, absorbing tension, softening conflicts, and reinforcing a sense of importance in the other person. This creates a subtle dependency masked as confidence. When the empath leaves, that external source of grounding disappears, and the internal structure that relied on it begins to weaken. What once felt like strength may reveal itself as fragility. Spiritually, this is not about revenge or cosmic punishment. It is about the correction of imbalance. Energy that was flowing in one direction suddenly stops, and the vacuum exposes what was previously concealed. Without someone constantly affirming their value or interpreting their behavior generously, unresolved insecurities rise to the surface. The absence of emotional buffering removes the illusion of control. Silence replaces reassurance. Distance replaces validation. In that quiet space, self-perception shifts. The individual can no longer rely on borrowed emotional light to sustain their identity. Instead, they are faced with themselves without filters. This exposure can feel uncomfortable, even destabilizing, because it reveals the difference between authentic inner strength and externally supported ego. Spiritually, this moment represents an invitation. It is an opportunity to build genuine self-awareness rather than continue seeking external reinforcement. Whether that invitation is accepted determines the outcome. The empath, on the other hand, experiences a different shift, the restoration of personal energy. What was once invested without equal return begins to flow back inward, creating clarity and renewed self-respect. Thus, what truly happens is not destruction, but revelation. Imbalance corrects itself. Illusion weakens. Truth surfaces. And in that truth lies the potential for growth, accountability, and authentic transformation. When the empath withdraws, the second spiritual shift that unfolds is the end of emotional compensation. In many imbalanced relationships, The empath unconsciously carries more than their share of psychological weight. They calm conflicts before they escalate, reinterpret harsh words in softer ways, and offer understanding even when they are hurt. This pattern delays natural consequences. It cushions behavior that would otherwise produce immediate distance or rejection. Spiritually, this creates a distortion in accountability because one person continuously absorbs the impact of another's actions. When the empath finally steps away, that cushion disappears. There is no longer someone translating defensiveness into vulnerability or reframing manipulation as insecurity. The raw effects of behavior are felt directly. Conversations that once ended in reconciliation now end in silence. Actions that once met patience now meet absence. The individual is left alone with their patterns without mediation. This is not about punishment. It is about the restoration of cause and effect. Energy that was deflected now lands where it originated. Over time, the weight of unprocessed emotions becomes more noticeable. Without an emotional caretaker managing the atmosphere, tension lingers. Misunderstandings remain unresolved. Social dynamics may begin to shift because the empath is no longer present to smooth interactions or protect reputations. This exposure creates a crossroads. One path leads to deeper denial, seeking new sources of validation to avoid discomfort. The other path leads inward toward self-examination. Spiritually, growth cannot begin until compensation ends. As long as someone else is absorbing the emotional consequences, transformation remains optional. But when the empath reclaims their energy, responsibility returns to its rightful place. The silence that follows can feel unsettling because it removes distraction. Yet within that silence lies clarity. Patterns become visible. Motivations become harder to disguise. The spiritual lesson embedded in this phase is simple, but powerful. Maturity begins where excuses end. When emotional protection is withdrawn, reality speaks more clearly. And in that clarity, the opportunity for authentic change finally emerges. Another profound spiritual shift occurs in the realm of self-confrontation. An empath often functions as a living mirror, reflecting not only strengths but also hidden wounds with compassion. Their presence can soften harsh traits by consistently seeing potential beneath defense mechanisms. This creates a dynamic where shadow aspects, pride, insecurity, manipulation, emotional avoidance, are partially concealed under the warmth of acceptance. As long as someone believes in your better nature, it becomes easier to believe the illusion of growth without actually transforming. But when the empath walks away, that mirror disappears. There is no longer a steady reflection offering understanding or reframing destructive behavior in hopeful language. What remains is unfiltered reality. Without someone absorbing projections, blame has nowhere to land. Without someone interpreting anger as pain, anger stands alone. Spiritually, this moment is deeply significant because projection can no longer operate as effectively. The individual is left alone with their reactions, their impulses, and the outcomes those patterns create. Silence becomes a teacher. In the absence of reassurance, self-perception begins to shift. The discomfort that arises is not caused by abandonment. It is caused by awareness. For perhaps the first time, there is space to see the gap between how one presents themselves and how they truly behave. This gap can either trigger defensiveness or invite humility. Spiritually, humility is the doorway to evolution. Without it, the cycle repeats. With it, genuine transformation begins. The empath's absence acts as a catalyst, not because they intended to teach a lesson, but because their departure removes distortion. Illusions struggle to survive without reinforcement. In that exposed space, truth becomes unavoidable. The person must decide whether to rebuild identity on authenticity or continue constructing it on external validation. Meanwhile, the empath experiences their own spiritual clarity. By stepping away, they affirm that compassion does not require self-sacrifice. Their withdrawal reinforces a universal principle. Love without accountability is not growth. Thus, what unfolds is not chaos, but revelation. And revelation, though uncomfortable, is the beginning of conscious change. The final spiritual shift unfolds through reclamation and realization. When the empath chooses to leave, it is not an impulsive act driven by anger, It is often the result of deep internal alignment. For a long time, they may have extended compassion beyond healthy limits, hoping patience would inspire change. But there comes a moment when self-respect becomes stronger than attachment. Spiritually, this decision marks the reclaiming of energy that was previously invested without balance. Attention, emotio, now labor, reassurance, and forgiveness begin flowing back to their rightful source. This shift restores inner stability and clarity. The empath often feels lighter, not because the relationship meant nothing, but because they are no longer carrying what was never theirs to hold. Boundaries strengthen, intuition sharpens, peace replaces confusion. At the same time, the absence they leave behind becomes a silent teacher. What once felt replaceable reveals itself as rare. Depth cannot be substituted with surface-level attention. Emotional presence cannot be replicated through admiration alone. The void is not dramatic, but it is noticeable. In quiet moments, comparison arises between what was lost and what attempts to fill the space. Spiritually, this realization carries weight because it exposes the value of authentic connection. Whether that recognition leads to growth depends on willingness to accept responsibility. But regardless of the outcome for the other person, the empath's transformation is undeniable. They move from overextension to equilibrium, from rescuing to respecting, from hoping to knowing. This is the deeper spiritual truth. When someone who genuinely sees you chooses peace over persistence, it is not rejection, it is alignment with higher self-worth. The lesson embedded in this experience is about balance, accountability, and conscious choice. When emotional light withdraws, illusion fades. What remains is clarity for both individuals. One is invited to evolve through reflection. The other rises through self-honor. And in that divergence, true spiritual growth reveals itself.